Michael was never a religious man. He grew up in a Christian home, attending church every Sunday alongside his mother, who always told him that God had a plan for him. But as he grew older, he began to question what he saw and heard. Religion seemed more like a set of rules and judgments than a path to truth. By the time he was 20, he had already abandoned the church, convinced that he could live a righteous life without having to follow dogmas or doctrines. To him, God was an abstract idea, a concept created to give meaning to existence. He was not an atheist, but he also did not feel the need to seek faith. Married to Sarah, a devout woman who never missed a church service, Michael respected her belief but avoided conversations about spirituality. Whenever the subject arose, he would change the topic, making jokes to hide his discomfort. Life continued its predictable course until one night that would change everything. It was an unusual winter for the city where he lived. The biting cold and the ice-covered road made any journey dangerous. Michael was on his way home after a long day working at his hardware store. On the radio, an old song was playing, and he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, tired but eager to get home. Then everything happened in an instant. The car began to slide. He tried to correct the direction, but the wheels did not respond. Panic set in as he realized he had completely lost control. In the blink of an eye, the road safety barrier broke and the vehicle plunged into a ravine. The impact was violent. He felt his body thrown against the seatbelt cutting into his skin, and then silence. Michael expected to feel pain, darkness, the end. But instead, something completely different happened. He opened his eyes and realized that he was no longer in the car. In fact, he wasn't in any place he could recognize. Everything around him shone with a golden light, intense yet gentle at the same time. It wasn't like sunlight, nor like the light from a lamp. It was something alive, pulsating, that enveloped every part of his being. Fear gave way to a feeling he had never experienced before, absolute peace. And then he realized he was not alone. There was a presence there. He didn't see a face, nor did he hear a voice in the conventional sense, but somehow he knew he was in the presence of something grand, something that had always been there, but that he had never recognized. Michael felt as if he were being enveloped by unconditional love, something that did not depend on what he had done or failed to do. There was no judgment, no condemnation, just a deep understanding of who he was, his choices, his failures, and his true purpose. Then a torrent of images flashed before his eyes. He saw his entire life unfold like a movie, but not the way he remembered it. Each moment had a different weight. He could feel not only his actions, but their impact on others. Every word spoken with arrogance, every gesture of indifference, every missed opportunity to show love and compassion. Among these visions, he saw something that made him shudder. A moment when he argued with Sarah about religion, mocking her faith. At the time, he had walked away satisfied with himself, convinced that he was right. But now, in the presence of that light, he felt the pain he had caused her. Even so, the presence did not judge him. Instead, it simply transmitted love. Then, a figure emerged from the light, a man in simple garments, radiating the same peace that permeated everything around him. "You lived in a cage, Michael," he said. "But God is not what you were taught." Michael tried to ask what that meant, but before he could speak, the light began to fade. He felt as if he were being pulled back, torn from that state of peace. He woke up gasping at the back of an ambulance. The pain returned with a vengeance. His body ached, his head throbbed, and the sounds of the real world invaded his senses again. Sirens, voices of paramedics, the sensation of cold on his skin. But none of that mattered as much as the memory of what he had just experienced. At the hospital, while recovering, the experience wouldn't leave his mind. Everything seemed too real to be a dream. Sarah was the first person he told. She listened intently, holding his hand. But when he mentioned that God was not what they had learned, that he was something much greater than any religion could define, she saw her expression change. "Maybe it was just your brain trying to process the trauma of the accident," she said cautiously. Michael shook his head. He knew it wasn't just a dream. The next day, Pastor John came to visit him. "Michael, I heard about what happened. Thank God you are here with us," he said, pulling up a chair. Michael nodded, but then The pastor leaned forward and lowered his voice. "But I need to warn you, not everything that seems good comes from God. The enemy is cunning. He can present himself as an angel of light." Michael was in shock. "You think I saw something evil?" he asked, feeling anger rising within him. "I'm just saying that everything outside of the scriptures is dangerous," the pastor replied. Michael felt a knot in his stomach. How could he explain what he had experienced to someone who already had his own fixed idea about God? After the pastor left, he sat by the hospital window, trying to understand whether he was right or if he had been deceived. But then, he remembered the peace he felt in that light. The unconditional love, the understanding. That was not something that would be associated with deceit or illusion. Later that night, when his mother came to visit him, she clutched her cross to her chest and prayed for him. "God gave you a second chance, Michael, but you need to return to him." He sighed. "I don't think it's that simple, Mom." She frowned. "You're being stubborn. God is giving you a warning, and you are ignoring it." After she left, Michael felt more alone than ever. The people closest to him couldn't understand what he had seen. They couldn't accept that perhaps God was much greater than the teachings they had received. That night, he began to write everything down. Every detail of the light, of the voice he heard, of the words of the man who emerged from the light. He didn't know why, but he felt he had to record it all. As the days passed, one thing became clear. He couldn't simply return to his old life. The God he had known was not restricted by religion or rules. He was pure and simple love, and like it or not, he needed to discover what that meant for his future. In the days following the accident, Michael felt that something within him had changed forever. He could no longer fit into his old routine. The hardware store, the casual conversations with customers, the quiet dinners with Sarah. Everything seemed distant, almost as if it belonged to another life. But the greatest change was not in the world around him, but within him. The memory of the light, of the presence, and of the words he had heard remained alive, more real than any other memory. He tried to ignore it, to convince himself that it was just an effect of the trauma, but the truth was inescapable. He needed to understand what had happened. The first person he tried to talk to about it was Sarah. At first, she listened patiently, holding his hand, trying to comfort him. But when Michael insisted that God was not what they had been taught, that the presence he felt went beyond the doctrines they knew, she fell silent for a long time. "Michael, you went through a terrible accident. Your body is recovering, and your mind also needs time to process all of this," she said, carefully choosing her words. Michael shook his head. "I know what I saw. I know what I felt. It was real, Sarah." She looked away. "But real in what way? The God we know has always been here. We have always sought him. Why would he reveal himself to you in this way and not to us?" Michael couldn't answer. He wanted her to understand. But the more he tried to explain, the further away she seemed to get. At work, the situation was no different. His colleagues noticed that something had changed. Before, Michael was skeptical, practical, someone who joked about religion. Now he was silent, thoughtful. His friend Dave was the first to ask, "Man, you're acting weird." "What's going on?" Michael hesitated. "I had an experience after the accident, something that changed my life." Dave laughed, but with a tone of concern. "Don't tell me you became religious now." Michael sighed. "It's not about religion. It's about something greater. I saw something." Dave's expression darkened. "I see. And what do you think you saw?" Michael knew that any answer he gave would be met with skepticism. "God. But not the way we imagined." Dave didn't know what to say. He just shook his head and went back to work. From that day on, Michael noticed that the looks people gave him had changed. Some avoided talking to him, others whispered, but nothing prepared him for the conversation he would have with Pastor John. The pastor showed up at his house after hearing about his experience through Sarah. "Michael, I heard about what happened. I came here because I'm concerned about you." Michael nodded but remained silent. The pastor pulled up a chair and looked at him seriously. Not everything that appears divine comes from God. The enemy is cunning, and he can appear as an angel of light. Michael felt a knot in his stomach. "You think I was deceived?" The pastor sighed. "I think you need to be careful. God gave us the Bible so we could know him. Everything that is outside of it can be dangerous." Michael frowned. "But what if there is more? What if God is greater than we can understand?" The pastor shook his head. "God has already revealed everything we need to know. If you keep questioning, you might distance yourself from him instead of drawing closer." Michael then realized that arguing was futile. After the pastor left, he felt even more alone. The experience he had was the most real thing in his life, but no one around him seemed willing to listen. That night, he grabbed a notebook and began to write. He tried to describe every detail, every sensation. He wrote about the light, about the overwhelming peace, about the figure that emerged and told him that he was living in a cage. The more he wrote, the more he realized that his experience could not be kept to himself. He began to search the internet to see if other people had gone through something similar. That's when he found Elisa. Elisa was a woman who shared her experience on a small spirituality forum. Her story was frighteningly similar to his, a near-death experience, an indescribable light, and a presence that did not fit the traditional descriptions of God. Michael sent her a message. The reply came quickly. "I know exactly what you saw." From that moment on, the two began to talk frequently. Elisa said that she too faced resistance from the people around her. "They don't want to listen," she said in one of their conversations. "But we can't stay silent," Michael agreed, but there was a part of Elisa's story that worried him. "I started to speak openly about my experience," she confided. "And that's when things got strange." Michael was on alert. "What do you mean?" "Some people began to warn me, saying that what I saw was not God, that it was a deception." Michael felt a chill. "Do you think it could be true?" Elisa hesitated. "No. What I felt was pure love. It wasn't something evil. But there are people who don't want us to talk about it." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. And then, something happened. The next morning, he found an envelope with no return address in his mailbox. Inside, there was only a note with 3 words written in trembling handwriting: "You are not alone." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. Who could have sent that? He showed it to Sarah, but she just sighed. "Michael, it could have been anyone. Maybe someone just playing a joke on you." But he felt it wasn't just that. In the following days, his mind wouldn't stop. He decided to return to the place where it all began, the lake where he had his first encounter with that presence. He sat on the bank and stayed there, waiting. The wind blew gently, the water moved in an almost imperceptible way, and then he felt it, the same peace, the same warmth enveloping his being. He closed his eyes. "If it's you, show me." No voice spoke, but deep inside Michael knew. It wasn't a deception, it wasn't an illusion, it was real. And now he had to decide. Would he keep this truth to himself, or would he share his experience, even if it cost him everything? Michael knew he could no longer run away. He had seen, felt, and experienced something beyond human comprehension. But speaking up meant facing judgment, disbelief, and even the possibility of isolation. Even so, he decided to move forward. He began sharing his story, first in small groups, then online. To his surprise, others emerged, people who had also experienced something similar. The truth he had found could not be ignored. He did not know where that journey would take him, but one certainty remained within him. God had called him to something greater, and he would answer.